reminding yourself
But
it's okay to say no, right? Because I think
yeah,
a lot of years of corporate time, right? The right answer is yes, and I'll figure it out. And what I'm slowly, it's been a year almost, right? What I'm kind of slowly
yeah,
learning is it's okay to say no to that thing that just
yeah,
isn't a priority, right? Doesn't price right. It doesn't make sense for my time. And but it's also okay to say yes to the thing that just doesn't pay anything. I've had those, business owners struggling with a something, right? And
hmm hmm
if that were to be a
yeah,
full-blown engagement, there's no way they pay for that, but I can find some time to give them some advice and some guidance on, right, how to get through the whatever they're going through with their bank. And that feels good, right?
hmm
Everything doesn't have to be the home run win, right?
yeah. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Leader with your host. I'm Steve Margerin, and today I'm very, very excited. We have an awesome guest with us today, Clint Hooppaw. And for those who don't know, Clint is the mayor of Apple Valley, Minnesota, which is a thriving city of about 56,000 residents here in Minnesota, and manages about a $30 million budget. And Clint's been mayor of Apple Valley about 5 years and councilman for about 10 years before that. Worked with the Academic Development Authority for Apple Valley for 15 years, served as president during that time. And then, of course, the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority for about 15 years. And when he's not doing some of his public work, his day job in the spare time that he has, he helps banks and credit unions with leadership coaching. After 30 plus years in banking and credit unions, he works and leads High Point Advisors that advises these organizations and executive leadership in these organizations. So, without further ado, a big welcome to Clint. Clint, thanks for joining the show. I really, really appreciate you being on today.
Thanks, Steve. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and in our previous conversations, and we've had a few, and really, really good to have conversations as it relates to leadership, and how we blend opinions and work on finding consensus and driving organizations into disparate places. And one of the great things about having you on the show is these are challenging times, both in public service in general, and specifically at the local, municipal, and local levels, but really throughout. And one of the things we had talked about that I find really interesting is this idea of productive conflict. And talking about productive conflict in the current political environment, has real teeth to it, right? There's really something there. Tell me a little bit about and explain to the audience this idea of productive conflict that we talked about.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Steve. It's a natural part of what we do, and I don't care if that's the corporate world, if that's the advising, the consulting piece, and that city, and that's where I really started to figure out that those skills really overlap, right? And
Hmm
when I decided to put my name on a ballot in 2010, I don't know that I knew all those things at that point. And you kind of figure out where your skills kind of fit in. Um,
Right.
but you and I have shared this joke before, but if we all get along every time, one of us isn't necessary, right? And
Yeah.
I just say that to kind of drive home the fact that I don't care what room I'm in. It can be a corporate boardroom, it can be a small meeting of leaders, it can be a team, or it can be a city council meeting, or a work session, or a group of constituents. I know we're not going to all agree, and we probably shouldn't, right? And I don't know that even I agree with me every day, right? Because the things change, you learn new things, right? And we got to be willing to kind of open to listen to those.
Sure, sure. And then, taking that a step further, what does that look like in practice, right?
Mhm.
I mean, and it's challenging, right? We're all, naturally human and naturally have our opinions and naturally, these hot topics that sometimes pop up, drive emotion. I mean, what does that look like both in the mindset and in practice when we're having these conversations?
Yeah, that pushback gets to be really critical in any kind of good decision making, right? I come into it with my opinions, but maybe I've done a lot of work on one side of an issue or one side of a project, right? And somebody raises their hand and says, "Oh, if we do that, this happens," right? And sometimes that's experience, from within. Sometimes it's what they bring with them before. Um, you're always trying to balance that. We've always done it this way, right? Which is experience. That's somebody saying, I've done
Yeah.
it this way and it's not broken. So why would we change it? If we don't make some change, we're always going to get the same results. So that's where that comes in for me, is just being willing to listen to those, but being able to push back both. And titles sometimes get in the way of that, right? You get in the room with somebody with a different title, and sometimes people will pull back, and that's not always healthy.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you keep that conversation going? Because I see that, with my clients and in my client companies where, there's if there's a strong leader or, charismatic leader or something like that, there's sometimes this resistance to speak up or those kind of things. And obviously it's a cultural issue, but, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about how that plays
Hmm.
itself in public service, right?
Yeah, I think it plays out in public service a lot of the same way it plays out in the in the boardroom or the executive leadership team.
Yeah.
There's a recent book, and I'll forget the author, but it's called Collective Illusions, that I just finished, and
Mm,
he has a line in there, and I will find the author by the time we're done here for you. Todd Rose, that's his name.
mm,
Harvard PhD. But he's got a line in that book that starts with, the loudest voices repeated the most often are not the majority. And
yeah.
that's the thing that really struck me in the intro to that book. And I think that just applies across all of us. If we are, right, that really charismatic leader might be the one who tends to speak, who doesn't want to let that little bit of silence in that void kind of come in. And yet,
Yeah.
right, the one I really want to hear from might be the person who didn't speak up at all. And we certainly see that in public service. Those who are passionate are more likely to reach out, right? They're more
Hmm.
likely to organize people to come in. And what's good and bad is we hear from them, but I maybe hear from those 15 to 20 people, and I'm representing 56,000, right? Or take that to a larger scale, take that to a state or a national level, and you somehow have to balance those loud voices, which might always be in your voicemail, your email, or in the room, with the fact we
Hmm.
need to also represent everybody else and understand where they're coming from. So that means we need to reach out, right?
Yeah.
In a boardroom setting, that often means you need to pay attention to who is there and who isn't speaking, and in a way that doesn't put them on the spot, pull out their opinion. In a public
Yeah.
setting, it probably means that I need to spend more time in front of people, right, who didn't seek me out, but I sought them out to try to learn that.
Yeah, and so that's got to be a little bit different, or maybe it's not. But working, from your executive roles in banking and with credit unions, and getting that alternative voice, if you will,
Hmm.
right? I mean, we have skip meetings, and we have
Yep.
mechanisms to try to solicit engage at different levels in corporate. What is, besides knocking on doors, or maybe that's the answer? What does that look like in public service and as the mayor of Apple Valley?
Yeah. Technology in some ways has made it easier, right? 'Cause it's easier for people to find you and to get in contact with you. Um,
Sure.
it just takes a little more of a proactive effort, right? It takes when somebody's upset or they don't like something, they're reaching out. And I don't always get an answer to those. In fact, I almost don't, right? So
Hmm.
you might get an upset email from somebody, and there's a response from me that says, hey, this is hard to do in email, right? Because the context is lost and it's disjointed.
Sure.
Let's get together and talk about it. And I will say I get almost no response to that. So people want to fire an
Oh,
opinion
interesting.
in, but it's tough to get into a dialogue sometimes. And so then you're stuck. What's more behind that opinion? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Truly, it's just like a whole lot of other things we've done, whether you're growing a business or doing other things. The more approachable you are, right, the easier you are to find. Um, I'm not recognized often, right? But when I am, it's nice to have that conversation and be able to dig in. Now, unfortunately, it's usually when I have a bag of groceries in my hand or right, the Home Depot cart's all loaded up. But
Sure.
Yeah.
sometimes just being present in those things helps.
Sure, sure. So, what are some of the differences? And we've talked, and there's so much similarity, and that's one of the reasons I love chatting with you is that public services and especially in leadership and elected roles, it seems so different and
Yeah.
distant from the normal business conversations. But, you know, I've learned from you, I mean, it's the same concepts when it
Hmm.
comes to leadership. Um, very many of the same concepts. What are some of the big differences or the ahas? I mean, you've been involved in
Yep.
public service for a long, long time, but what were some of the surprises for you when you got involved in leadership at the public level?
Yeah, I will say beyond the conversations that we're talking about, right? Some of the surprises were just how complex and how deep some of these
Mm,
things run. What it takes to run a city, right?
yeah,
The stereotype of kind of the lazy government worker I have yet to see exist, right? We've all got people on our teams who we wish might do things different or whatever.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Um, but right, that thing that might look like somebody not doing anything is not always what you think it is, right?
Yeah.
I'll never forget the angry call I had one day because a resident had seen one of our fire captains in a fire vehicle having lunch with his wife at Applebee's, right? And
Oh,
and why did we let them take the fire? And this is the little SUV, right, that they use to respond. And how come we let him take it to Applebee's? And what you needed to realize was these are paid on call firefighters.
yeah.
He's ready to respond. And so if he gets a call while he and his wife are having lunch, he's in the car, right? She's got to find another ride home, and that's the quickest way
She,
to get
he's
him to the
Ubering.
scene, right?
Yeah,
So it's just understanding that what that perception that somebody might have had of that looks off. Well, that looks different than you might expect, right? But it
right.
absolutely is the best way to get the job done. And so I think some of those kind of surprises are there. The incredible amount that everything costs is always a surprise, right? But then I
Yeah,
have to remember we're delivering those services to 56,000 people,
right.
right? And there are certain requirements that come into things like building codes and how we deliver things that can add to those numbers. That as an individual homeowner, right, I wouldn't necessarily expect to put in my own home.
Sure, sure. And so, I mean, that's got to be, those are some of the maybe easier questions when it's based on, you know, maybe a misunderstanding or lack of
Mm.
knowledge and those kind of things we can kind of explain and hopefully that quells it. Are there any that, you know, what are the most challenging
Yeah.
type of questions or challenges or outreach that you typically
Y-
get from constituents?
the most challenging situations are the ones we can't easily solve, right? So
Yeah,
if it's and I'll oversimplify and say if it's a pothole in your street, that's an easy one to solve, right?
yeah,
We can't drive every street every day and find them. Some things pop up, people call, we get somebody out there, it get fixed, and we all move on. There's a pretty well agreed upon outcome in the situation of a pothole, right?
yeah,
What do we all want? We want the pothole full, and we want it done well.
sure.
Those situations get stickier when you've got competing interests, and that might be
Mm,
neighbors in a neighborhood not agreeing on certain things like property condition. One neighbor
mm,
wants the other neighbor to maintain their property better. Um,
mm.
maybe it's a
Interesting.
home in a neighborhood that's gone vacant, and it's not being kept up to the standards of what you and I would consider, but it's also not dangerous, right? It just needs a
Yeah,
little more attention. And we have to remember that everybody's got rights in this. So I can't just have somebody load up the city truck and go paint the thing and send them a bill. As much as the doer in me says that might be the best answer, right? We still have to respect the rights of the others. And we see
right.
those scenarios come up because there's not an easy solve. We also
Yeah.
have scenarios where there are people living in homes that, in our community that have more challenges than others, and sometimes those challenges spill over to neighbors. And while that's not comfortable for the neighbor who gets impacted, the person living in the home who has challenges with life also has a set of rights. And so
Yeah.
it's not a pothole. I can't just go throw some asphalt in it, stomp on it, and make it go away. We got to figure out how to help everyone understand what's going on. Maybe give them some tools to have a better conversation, right? Sometimes it's how do you bring people together in the same room to get them talking about what's happening so they understand what's really impacting those people, and
Sure.
maybe for right, and how their actions are impacting others, and you're kind of mediating, right, more than you're trying to
Yeah.
solve.
That's interesting. So is that something that that you're offering that you're doing on a regular basis? Hey, let's all get together
It's
at
the
City Hall and chat about it or
I think it's the real life application of the 80/20 rule, right? It is such a small percentage of everything that we do, and yet it can be incredibly time consuming
Mm,
when those
yeah,
are. And you're happy to spend the time, right? The time isn't the issue, but like most things, right? The small issue consumes an excess amount of time. And when
sure.
you right look at the impact and those kind of things, hugely impactful for those involved, but not hugely impactful for the 55,980 other people in town.
Right,
So
right. Yeah, and that's a tough balance. And I think when I think about balance, and we talk about public service today, there's a lot of conflict, different opinions. It's a challenging environment, and I don't know that it's necessarily any more challenging than it's ever been. Maybe I don't know enough about it. But one of the things that you had mentioned during one of our calls that really kind of stuck with me was this idea of assuming positive
mhm.
intent, right? And I can disagree with somebody on a particular issue, and in business and whatever the context, and I can be fairly passionate about it. I have a strong opinion. Maybe the other person has a strong opinion. But you introduced to me this idea, and I've heard it in different ways. But I really liked your words of let me begin by assuming positive intent. This
Mhm.
person isn't out to get me, isn't out to, demolish whatever it is we're talking about, but assume this positive intent. How does that play itself out in your conversations, in work with High Point or in your public work?
Yeah, I would love to take full credit for that, and I'll say much like my earlier comments, right? Some of the best ideas come from the people you get lucky enough to surround yourself with, and
Sure.
that concept came from my old one of my credit managers that used to work for me, right? And she was fantastic and still is at pulling teams together and getting people kind of on the same page and moving in the same direction. And if for those who have worked kind of behind the scenes in a credit or a banking environment, right, they're no different than anything else, right? Sales and marketing fights, right?
Yeah.
CFO versus chief marketing officer conversations, they're all the same to some degree in that it's easy to get really siloed kind of into your own piece, right? Whether that's a business development and the sales side and the production side,
Hmm.
and then you get the credit and the risk
Hmm.
side saying, whoa, 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 we're going way too fast, right? We're taking way too much risk. And those concepts came out of kind of pulling those teams together and just getting everybody understanding what the bigger goal was, but then understanding that when the sales guy is breathing down the back of your neck to get your thing finished and out the door, it's not because they don't care about the rules. It's not because of right a disregard for other things. It is right their goal and their incentive and their desire is to move the whole thing forward right in that realm. The credit folks are saying, hey, my
Hmm.
job is to protect that. So when we all come into that kind of understanding that nobody came in here to break the system, right? I've jokingly
Right.
told people nobody got out of bed today and said I'm going to go to the office and screw up somebody's day. Like that's almost nobody's right first thought
Yeah.
when they roll over and hit the alarm clock in the morning. And then we'll take that back to the public service piece too, right? We can vehemently disagree on whether the taxes are too high or we're spending too much on a park or those type of conversations. But to just say, wait a minute, so the person who doesn't want to pay as much in their tax bill doesn't mean they want kids to be uneducated, right? Doesn't mean they don't want any good facilities. They're looking at it from that lens. The person who's advocating for right more facilities, more of a certain service, same thing. They're not saying go spend money wildly and the other person's wrong. They're saying, hey, these things are important too, and somewhere we got to figure out what the middle is, right? How we solve
Right.
for all of those or help make those decisions. But that's really where it's come from, right? When you say that, Steve, it's the understanding of you just reframe it that where are they coming from, right? I don't think they're a negative
Hmm.
person. And I'll say that you'll get, I'll call it 5% anecdotal, not statistical, right?
Yeah.
That maybe do have an ill intent when they get into something, right? And we find those fairly well. And the story that I will never forget is an interview that went wrong. And we asked every interview I've ever been part of, we ask a conflict resolution kind of set of questions, right? And it starts with something along the lines of conflict is natural in what we do. Tell me how you resolve it when you and a team member don't get along, right?
Yeah.
Because what I want to learn from that is, do they run to the boss? Do they get mad? Those kind of
Yeah.
things. We had an applicant said, I come into work every day ready to do battle. And I first thought
Oh.
he was joking, and then I realized he wasn't. Like that was his mindset, that he was there to win no matter what the fight was.
Oh
And we
boy.
decided that was the wrong mix for the team, right?
Right. Right.
And glad we found it when we did. We were able to, and he's doing well. He found a good spot for himself, right? I still bump into him every now and then, but it was just the wrong mix for the group of people we'd put together. So I think you got to be ready to understand that that small percentage is just looking for a fight too, and you need to also figure out how to work with them. And
Yeah.
right,
And
in the corporate environment, I
that's
can choose
interesting.
who I work with. In the city environment, I can't. So we also have to figure
Right.
out how to work with that personality.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting as you still talk with that individual that there is a place where that maybe does make sense. There are roles where maybe that kind of mindset is helpful or necessary. Uh, I'll have to think about that, right? Because
Hmm.
I feel like there's a role for everybody, right? And even though I may have a challenge working with a particular type of individual, doesn't mean that they don't have value, right? There's maybe a different spot for them. So I'll have to jot down that for our next conversation. I wanna explore that a little bit. Um,
You asked earlier about things I'd learned along the way, and say the one thing, we've had some turnover on city council in the 15 years I've been there, but as a group, right, there is an understanding that the issues are the issues and the people are the people. And
yeah,
so we can have a good discussion, right, about an issue and what the right thing to do is, and then we can move on to the next one without carrying that baggage over, right? We can still
yeah,
see each other in the parking lot after and talk about the kids and the grandkids and the families and the weekend plans as you would with friends and acquaintances. And it's been intentional, right? We even if we leave angry or upset, I've had a council member call me at 10:30 after a meeting to say, "Hey, that didn't go like we wanted. How do we not do that again?" Right? Which just
yeah,
tells me there's some respect there from an individual level. Um, I'd like you just to imagine your city staff for a little bit too, because I think of that, right? Where it's you can't spend 30 years hiring, training, recruiting people without thinking of how your actions as a five-member corporate board that you are in a city council, right, impact staff. And imagine that you're the leader of a city, you're the CEO of a company, and half of your job is mediating disputes between your five board members, right? Is that a great recipe for being effective? And so I think we owe it to everybody to figure out how to get along, right, and get to the right answer. Doesn't mean we're unanimous all the time, doesn't mean we don't disagree, but that really
right.
can't spill into, right, blaming staff for activities or making it hard for them to do their jobs.
Yeah, somebody, and I think we talked about it, but somebody shared something similar with me, and it was one of my mentors, and he would always kind of ask me as I brought up another person, or a challenge that I'm having with a department or something like that. He'd say, "Hey, just real quick, just so I can frame this, is this a personality discussion or is this a business discussion? Either is fine. I just want to make sure I
Hmm.
understand it." And he was obviously teaching me along the way, and maybe it took the third or fourth time he asked, and I was like, "Hey, let's forget this issue for a minute. Let's talk about that question that you asked me," and it really formed a lot of my leadership um,
Hmm.
mantra around dealing with conflict and understanding personality and policy, right, are three different things and are treated three different ways, right? If we're having a good conversation about policy or a business issue, regardless of whether I get along well with the person or whether we have similar personalities or whether our personalities match, or whether I don't have as much knowledge of the person, I don't know them as well.
Hmm.
Whatever those things is separate from the dynamics of the policy and the business issue, and likewise those conversations about building relationships and hey, we have this personality, challenge. We need to sort that out. Has nothing to do with the other two.
Right.
So that was, and I think we had talked about this idea of, not only assuming positive intent, but working towards, and you brought up verbal judo a
Yeah.
little bit, and this idea of getting folks to a place of good discussion by, kind of leading them to this path of understanding where we're all coming from. And talk a little bit about that verbal judo. And I believe it's
It's
a
a book.
book, right?
It's a
Yeah.
book, and I will say it's an interesting concept when you take it out of its original content, right? And so the author of Verbal Judo, probably if you look behind me, it's probably sitting up there somewhere.
Sure.
This is a course content written for police officers, right? So, right, verbally, how do you disarm a conversation, right? How do you get to a better spot without it needing to turn physical? So that's a very literal, right, how the course is
Mm.
applied. They've spun this off into other trainings that are more designed for what you and I might deal with every day, right? It's the odds of our job turning physical at the end of the day are really, really slim. But it doesn't mean we
Right.
don't have some tough conversations, right? And we can, how we react really sets the stage for what happens next in any conversation. Um, and you can take those principles that are in verbal judo, apply them to a whole lot of things. And so, time in corporate world, I ran a collections team for 5 or 6 years, right? So I want you to picture, and we're going to talk about all the principles that apply at this point, right? So let's start with positive intent. Nobody went into their bank, almost nobody went into their bank or their credit union, took out a loan with the intent of not repaying it. However, something
Right.
came up in life, right? So how do you kind of understand what came up in life, and hopefully how do you get them right to a good conversation around that? But then people who are stressed will say and do things that just don't feel good, right?
Yeah.
And it's not personal. You have to somehow separate what feels like a really personal comment, right? Not agree, do what you need to do. I appreciate that. Let's talk about this, right? I don't have to argue with it. You can call me every name in the book. That's fine. I don't have to argue with that, right? But let's get back to the topic at hand and how we can help you. The more you can let go of those kind of pieces that just don't feed the conversation, right, and move
Mm.
on, the more you can give people some space to react, breathe, right, do those kind of things. More than once, my conversation was, "This isn't going well today. Can I call you back tomorrow at 9? And can we
Mm.
pick this up then?"
Yeah.
Why? Because I needed some
Yeah.
time to breathe, right? Because I can feel my own blood pressure creeping up, or it's easy for me to say, don't take it personally. But when you call into right account my heritage and my mother and all those things in a short conversation, right? It's a battle to keep those emotions under.
We're
They're
inherently
clearly
human beings.
emotional. So, right, if we can just set that
Yeah.
aside, pick it up tomorrow, give them a little time to think about it, right? Gives me a little time to think when the pressure isn't on, and we can have a better conversation tomorrow. It just changes the whole thing. And so, Verbal Judo is a great read. It's a really good audio book. It's dated, right? It was written at a different time. So you need to almost read the book with some positive intent, understand some of the words and phraseology used were really relevant at the time written, maybe don't
Yeah.
live up quite as well today, but the principles are also really sound.
Yeah. And I don't know much about judo, but I like the analogy of uh, using the energy of someone else to kind of
Hmm.
deflecting that, diffusing that, and then readdressing, right? And I really like that. That visual helps me understand, right? And certainly lots of scenarios where that makes a lot of sense in corporations, but I love the fact that it comes from police de-escalation, right? And the most critical conversations, right?
Well,
And critical means something in those kind of conversations. So certainly there's something for us regular folks to
yes, if
learn
they
from
can
that,
if
right?
they can de-escalate in that scenario where truly, right, you are talking life or death, and not just your own, but
Yeah.
but maybe the other person as well, right? How do you get them
Mm.
to be rational and reasonable so that you don't have to take it up the next level?
Right. Right. Oh, this is awesome. And some of your work, I believe, is around this idea of managing conflict with High Point.
Hmm.
Is that some of the work and the training that you're
We do. So
doing now? Okay.
yeah, so some of
Yeah.
the trainings that so we do some trainings for really aimed at bank and credit union folks, and uh, one of the local organizations that does a lot of those trainings had approached me last year, and we started to talk about some gaps in their curriculum. So there's plenty of training, right? There's a lot of training to understand concepts behind numbers, right? How to take a financial statement and turn it into a set of data that you can act on. But some of the other gaps that have come up, we've been in 15 years of really good economy, so we don't have a lot of folks in the institutions who've been went through the last downturn, much less the one prior to that. Um, we're in a culture of bigger organizations, and so the job roles tend to be more siloed. And so, right, my
Yeah.
first banking job was a small organization. I might have officially had a mortgage originator title on my business card, but I also filled ATMs, took out the trash, opened accounts, and when they were really
Sure.
crazy, I might have run a teller transaction or two, right? And so you kind
Sure.
of got
Sure.
forced to learn some different skills. And as institutions gets bigger, right, that even initial job becomes a little more siloed. So how do we help some people build some skills around that? One of the courses we're doing next week, we did it the first time last April. The title of the course is unlocking a successful credit presentation, which sounds really boring,
Hmm.
right? But we don't spend any time on numbers. We spend time with a fairly complex, layered case study, and we work through how you take that case study and that request and ultimately get your executive team or your board to sign off on it, right? So
Sure.
this is a communications class wrapped up in kind of real life, right, real life scenarios. Um,
Sure.
and we talk about things in that class. There's a whole section about, and there's so in that case study, I buried some conflict, right? Some things that I know that when I put five people together, we're going to have three different answers. And
Yeah.
how do you work through that, right? Like, how do you kind of come to the what should be included and what shouldn't? So there's some conflict resolution in there, but there's also some how you present yourself. And
Hmm.
so I tell them beginning of the class, one of my goals is I want you to be the go-to person in your organization. And I will
Yeah.
share that example of when I was a credit approver, my last corporate job, right? I might come in on Monday morning and have 17 things to get through, right? I will tell you the ones I got to first were from the person I knew who put together the best deals. So I would go through, I could go pick Amanda's emails out. I knew they were going to be
Hmm.
well thought out, complete, right? The analysis was sound, the logic was sound, and I could buzz through them in a hurry. And I also knew the person who I won't name, whose emails I would get to last, right? And so reputation for Amanda is she gets stuff done quick because she's getting it to me and I'm turning it quick, right? So
Yeah.
how do we position people to succeed that way versus just turn numbers onto a page and right help tell the story, right?
Yeah.
So
And hope it all works out.
right,
Yeah.
right.
That's interesting. So, uh, in Mayor of Apple Valley right now, you're still sitting, obviously, on the Economic
Yep,
Development Authority. Minnesota Transit Authority is still involved
yep.
with that, I
Still
think.
still am.
Yeah. And somehow you manage a day job. How do you get it all done, Clint? I just have
You
to ask, right?
you just
Because you never seem like you're flustered,
I
and you got a lot going on.
there's some tricks to that, right? And there's some just I've always had a lot going on, so you just kind of figure it out. But I spend part of the thing we try to teach people as we get to coach and mentor some people is right to kind of set yourself up to succeed tomorrow as best you can. And so,
Yeah,
right, the end of every day is, I'm looking 3 days out on the calendar, figuring out what's going on. I'm looking at meetings 2 weeks out. Am I prepared? Do we still need to have them? What research do I need to do so we're not showing up completely unprepared?
sure.
And part of it's just how I deal with stress or anxiety or whatever comes with that, right? I know I'm going to sleep better if at the end of the day I've looked at my calendar, I know what there is, I block an awful lot of time. Right, I knew we were going to record this podcast today, so I very intentionally didn't schedule a meeting for 2 hours after this. Two things:
Right.
one, I didn't want to rush this. We never know when technology is going to creep up, right?
Yeah.
But I also wanted time to get my head back in the next meeting, right, before that
Yeah.
ends. So it's intentional, and we just prioritize every day, right? There is going to be days that are going to be, paying job client heavy, and I know that's going to be the day. There are going to be days that I'm spending all day on city related issues, and that's okay. So I try to group those where I can, right? Try to stay in the same
Yeah,
lane as much as possible. But and then there are days that are just going to not go like you think they're going to go, right? And
sure.
that's okay. And then we try to find a little time to just, make sure we leave some margin in there for other stuff, right? I mean, family and friends are important, but I had a call from a friend of mine who runs the Open Door Pantry up in Egan, and as we're recording this, right, we're dealing with government shutdown and SNAP benefits and those kind of things, and Jason's ask was, do you think you can help us with some food distribution on Saturdays in November? Uh, Prior to High Point and right getting out of the day-to-day job, there's no way I could have said yes, but it was nice to be able to say yes and adjust a few things and go be able to do things that feel good, right? That are beyond just the work
Yeah,
stuff too. So, and that's a
yeah.
little
So
energizing
built
when
in
you get
some
back to Monday,
flexibility.
right? To know that you actually did something good. So,
Yeah, yeah. And there's, we talked about the conference last week, and there's this idea of self-sovereignty, and there's a general kind of conversation around, certain kinds of flexibility in working our own consultancy, and you have your advisory, and for me, with all my relocations and during my corporate career and my travel and everything, with my current work and my consultancy, it does give me more flexibility for the family, and those things that I always wished I could get to
yep.
during my corporate time.
Or reminding yourself
But
it's okay to say no, right? Because I think,
yeah,
a lot of years of corporate time, right? The right answer is yes, and I'll figure it out. And what I'm slowly, it's been a year almost, right? What I'm kind of slowly
yeah,
learning is it's okay to say no to that thing that just
yeah,
isn't a priority, right? Doesn't price right. It doesn't make sense for my time. And but it's also okay to say yes to the thing that just doesn't pay anything. And I've had those
yeah.
business owners struggling with a something, right? And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if that were to be a full
Yeah,
blown engagement, there's no way they pay for that, but I can find some time to give them some advice and some guidance on, right, how to get through the whatever they're going through with their bank, and that feels good, right? And
mm-hmm.
everything doesn't have to be the home run win, right? Sometimes you mix them
Yeah.
together and it comes back.
Yeah, and speaking about client engagements, there's folks will ask me, so how do you work with folks? And I say, it depends how what they need, and so there's idea that I actually spent a lot of time talking about it last week is, I'm working to start where the client's
Hmm.
at, right? Even if in my mind and experience, I know that they need X, Y, and Z, right? But right now, budgetarily or time wise, or just where they're at, you know, um, in their mind and perspective on the business, maybe only B and C makes sense, and that's okay. I'm going to let them know about X, Y, and Z,
Right.
and my thoughts on that. I wouldn't be doing them service if I ignored that. But then this B and C, or whatever might
Yep.
make sense based on where they're at, and that's okay, right? That's okay. I just want to make sure I'm adding value, and sometimes it's not like you said, the best financial scenario, but you know it's hard for me when I'm seeing small business owners, or in your
Yep. Yep.
banking owners, when I see them struggling and I have the answer, right, or I have a path towards a better day, and it's hard for me not to engage and provide something, right? So
You do. You
I
don't.
agree.
I like the ABC or the right the a couple three options, right? Here's maybe how
Yeah,
in a perfect world I suggest, but here's other ways we can help. And right, by the
yeah,
way, if none of those work, just call me when you get stuck. I'm happy to pick up the conversation, right? We'll do
yep,
something else till you're ready. Um, Never have an issue giving somebody a something I've created, right? Maybe it's a workflow or a process,
yeah,
right? The magic is in how you implement it, not the form. But if it gives them something when they just absolutely didn't budget for something this year, and right, work on this. If you think there's some value, let's come back and talk next year about how we can help you implement it or get A, B, and C done. But
mm,
right, that still feels good to be able to just hand some of those over and say, right, this has worked for us, but you have to work at it.
yeah. Yeah, and I love that because there's a couple of schools of thought in the consulting world, and that's anything you have is a value, and you
Yep.
should get a buck for it, right? And then the other school of thought is you just give and give and give, because folks in our
Yep.
scenario, our expertise and our real value is in uh, shepherding that implementation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because I give somebody a book, if they don't know how to read, right,
It
it's
doesn't
not going to
help.
help them. Yeah, so I'm in that school of thought where I'll just if I have something that'll help, I'll give it to you, right? And if it
Yep.
helps and adds value, awesome. Moves you further down the road, awesome. At some point, I'm here to help even further if you need it, right?
And there is a little of they have to have some comfort that you can actually solve the problem, right? So sometimes that
Yeah,
giveaway is the, oh wait, I see value in this, but we need more help getting it further along, and that becomes it almost leapfrogs your time, right? Because
yeah, that's true.
I think for guys like you and I, the value is there's no 90-day ramp up. Like you drop me in and we go on day one, right?
Right, right.
And so some of that kind of helps people see that you can go on day one.
Yeah, and we've done
So
this a couple of times, Clint, right?
yeah, the problems aren't that different, right? They're just a little there's nuance and there's people, but the core issue is remarkably the same. Sometimes to the point you have to remind yourself whose stuff you're working on, right? Because the issues are that close.
Yeah, that does happen, and it's awesome talking with you. It's funny because we do our work in the business world seemingly very different, right? We're helping out different types of organizations with different types of problems, but at the core of that is this idea of leadership, and we're so aligned on that, and our methods are very similar. And then we talk about your public work, your work in public, and again, the ideas often come down to leadership and how people work together, and very similar there, right? And so I really appreciate having you on the podcast today. Great conversations. I know you and I could probably talk for a couple hours, but this was a great show, and is there anything that you want folks to leave with, or last word? And if not, that's okay.
I'll just be brief. You mentioned a mentor earlier, right, and giving you a little bit of advice, and that just sparked a thought, right? That I'm in a good spot. I've done this for a while. I've been able to help other people, but that wouldn't have happened without all the people who don't know they had an impact, right, over the
Yeah,
years. You mentioned a very specific example of yours. I think of mine, very young in my career, fired up to get something done. It's 8 in the morning. The boss walks in, and my VP grabs me and says, "Why don't you let him get his coffee cup filled, take a few deep breaths, delete a couple emails, and then we'll go attack the problem." Right? It was just you would not remember he told me that today, right? But I do, and it was a little different frame up of, I'm right here, and he needs a few minutes to get up to my speed, right, before we jump in.
yeah,
And there's been so many of those, right? And I think, right, we kind of owe it to share those with people as we get them, but then let's not forget none of us probably figured this out on our own, right, without some help from somebody else.
yeah, yeah. No, definitely. And any success that I think I've had in my life, I could name probably a long list of folks that contributed to that, and it wouldn't
Yep.
happen
And
without them.
sometimes
So
just showed up at the right time, didn't they? Right? You weren't expecting them, and the phone rang, and there they were, and somehow it came
yeah,
together.
and I know I'm trying to close, but I awesome point. I actually went back, and this is about probably 2 years ago, and I was talking with somebody who was a sort of mentor of mine early in my career, and I remembered specifically something that gave me a very different perspective on my work, and I mentioned it. I said, "Hey, I'm never going to forget when you told me X, Y, and Z," and he said, "What?" He didn't remember it, at all. Right? It didn't resonate with him. He's like, "Did I say that? I that doesn't even sound like something I'd say," right? And so he took zero credit for it to the point where he's questioning whether he actually said that. And here I was feeling like I was bearing my soul, right?
Right?
And thanking him for steering me right. But whether they know it or not,
That's
everybody
a
who crosses our path,
It's almost a
right?
sign of character that they don't know it, right? It's not something they
Right.
did for a
Yeah.
reason other than that's just who they were, and that's why it's not memorable. That's just who they were, and yet it's memorable to
Yeah.
you because that's not maybe the norm that we're used to.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's really easy, and I see this in my client work, right, where some of the things that I'll recommend to folks will seem like, you know, magic, right? It'll seem like this grand, super bit of wisdom, and I'll kind of be saying it offhand, and I'll be like, oh, well, that's just kind of one on one, right? It's just
Yep.
it comes very easy, and so we all have our different perspectives and experiences that bring us here. So, Clint, I really, really appreciate
Yeah,
you
this has
being
been
on the
fun, Steve.
podcast today. Hopefully, this has been a lot of fun. I know that there's a lot going on in your various worlds, so you taking some time to sit with us here on the Unscripted Leader podcast, I really, really appreciate that. And for folks who want to connect with Clint, I suppose they can find you on LinkedIn or hop out to your High Point Advisors website and connect with you that way.
Either one works. LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to track me down and see some of the current things. The High Point Advisors website is probably easiest to Google that one, but it's hpasuccess.com is that website. Either one, but feel free to drop me a note. Happy to catch up with about anyone.
Yeah, awesome. Clint, thank you very much again for being on the show. This was an awesome conversation, and I look forward to next time you and I connect. So thank you, everybody, for joining us here on the Unscripted Leader. And until next time, appreciate you. Bye for now.